Here we go then, it's time for a complete commentary on Terminator Dark Fate Defiance, a 3-title game where the actual significance of the 3 titles was lost on me and suddenly made me realise something late in the game, but we'll get to that. What we'll be doing here is looking at all the important moments of the campaign and going through what happens, seeing what I thought was good or bad or whatever else about it, and generally having a comfy time progressing through the horrible world of Terminator. An extremely short description of the game: it's a modern warfare-ish, RTS-ish game that's somewhere between Company of Heroes and Wargame or Steel Division in terms of depth of simulation versus gaminess. It's quite hard and unforgiving, but also pretty cool, with the difficulty making things more satisfying when it goes right in that classic way. However, whether the trade-off of misery now for satisfaction later is worth it remains up for debate. And I'm sure I'll get into that. I'll give a few overall review comments before I get started for those interested in that. This is one of those it's not for everyone type games, because it's got loads of really good stuff, but it's also packed with exactly the sort of quote-unquote bullshit stuff that I think hardcore gamers don't like, or that I see people moaning about. And I, at least in the past, would have liked to moan about it too, I think. There are loads of things that are either unfair or test the player on things they can't prepare for. We'll see that later. What we've got is this RTS-ish game that plays more like a turn-based, numbers-driven war game, despite its appearances. I'm thinking of those hex-based World War II Panzer Division roleplay type strategy games, and it's stuffed to the brim with cases where it really tests your ability to accept consequences, shall we say. To put it another way, it will just screw you over in a like how was I supposed to know that would happen kind of way, or a that's against the rules kind of way, and the actual game is dealing with that, because it's simulating a real war in the grand artistic sense, where unexpected and impossible to prepare for things have to be dealt with, whether it's fair or not, whether it's good game design or not. So the game is full of bullshit game design basically, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but in casual terms, it is inherently unenjoyable to encounter many parts of the game, unless you're in the mindset of expecting the unexpected, and you genuinely don't care if you make it to the end of the game or not. That's key, because what's at stake each time the enemy gets some scripted advantage no matter what you do, or you get bad RNG and everything falls apart, is actually being able to play the game, like to go through the content you paid for, as we'll see. I think most people won't have the right mindset by default, which is why this is quote-unquote not for everyone, as they say. I am included in that group, by the way. Like, I have a love-hate relationship with this game, where I thought it was really immersive and cool, but it's really frustrating and FOMO-inducing at the same time. However, there are 2 qualities that rescue the campaign from the potentially disastrous fate I'm implying here. It's not all that bad, because A, it's pretty cool and stuff, and that's good, that makes you want to play it, and much more importantly, B, you can save scum. And of course, in theory, that solves all issues, although it introduces new issues, which we'll see. This is a game that is at its most pure and intense and memorable if you Iron Man it while playing blind. But it probably is only fun if you don't, and it may be actually impossible to blind play through the game Iron Man style. All this stems from it being a somewhat realistic strategy game that has persistence between all missions, so all losses matter forever, whether you felt the loss was deserved or not, and that's where the conflicts are going to come from a sort of pure game design perspective. And you theoretically can also become weak enough to not even be able to do the next mission, or a mission down the line, and that could be the end of your campaign, which of course is a frustrating thought to have even if it never happens. You can even unceremoniously run out of fuel and not be able to drive to the next mission, but we'll get to stuff like this. I'm going to go through a mission or 2 in each video and commentate on my experience and thoughts, from gameplay to lore to random meta stuff about playing this game while being a paranoid wreck, and we'll see what we see, so let's get started. This first mission we're looking at is a tutorial that explains how to fight, and I must say it's very good in that I feel like I picked it up really fast despite it being a bit more complicated than the average RTS. All it really does is give you a PowerPoint presentation on how to fight, which I cut out here. But it was a good PowerPoint presentation, it did the job. The goal of this mission is just to lose the battle to some machines and leave. And by the way, if you have no idea what the premise of Terminator is, I guess it will become clear soon enough. It's humans versus an AI entity trying to take over the world, using an army of things that look like spooky props designed for a 30 to 40 year old Hollywood movie, and what do you know, there's a reason for that. I'll probably be dumping on how terrible the AI's army is as we go along. But just know that in the Terminator world, the AI armies canonically lose their war with the humans, and the Terminator story happens as a last-ditch effort, I think, lore-wise. So we have the advantage, don't we? We're fighting the war the AI will lose, so let's see if we can make that happen. This is a prequel to the whole, time travel Terminator plots of the films. But it's not a prequel, by the way, to the 2 Terminator films I have seen, that being 1 and 2. Because it turns out that Old Man Devin missed the part where the canon was updated and various things are different because of timelines, and basically, this is part of the modern Terminator Dark franchise timeline, which overwrites the original, hence the machine war is taking place in the 2020s instead of the 1990s as in the original story, and why the AI is called Legion instead of Skynet. There are probably other differences, but the only notable one is that as far as I recall, in the original Terminator storyline, North America was completely destroyed in a nuclear war, and the scenes of the machine war you see are canonically happening in South America, which generally survived. Can anyone correct me on that? I'm just sort of making this up from the extreme vague memories I always like to rely on for these commentaries, but in this timeline, the machine uprising wasn't some sudden nuclear war. I think it was more of a general prolonged crisis that sort of ramped up to some not quite so bad day, which was then renamed Judgment Day, where the machines took over the military. I think it said somewhere that Legion controlled the economy and starved everyone out. The point being, North America's still in okay condition. It's still heavily populated. The cities are still there, if not very inhabited anymore. And I think there was an old plot point where, in the original Terminator storyline, you couldn't go outside during the day because the machines were so heavily oppressing the world that they would see you and kill you instantly, so everything happened at night. Whereas that's clearly not the case in this timeline. Maybe the machines in the old timeline didn't invent night vision. I don't know why that was a thing. Probably just more plot holes all over the place. Well, we're in a much nicer world than I was expecting, basically. We're sort of out here in the countryside, and things are okay. Some places are nuke damaged a bit, but we'll be exploring the lands of South North America throughout the game and meeting all kinds of people doing their thing. Occasionally, we'll have to fight an evil AI, and it's actually kind of shocking how little you fight the AI in this game, but we'll get to that. We end up in what is basically a more advanced tutorial set 10 years after that previous one, where we meet Lieutenant Church, who is our main character you'll see pop up here and there. Even after 10 years, the machines haven't made that much progress, and we're just out here in the countryside taking out their patrols with our unit. A unit led by a former cop named Stevens, who we saw in the tutorial promoted himself into army leadership on the spot when his local unit's officers all got killed. As far as I know, the official army regulation in that situation is the next person to give any orders whatsoever becomes the new overall commander, even if they're not in the army. Probably, so that's his claim to fame, and now he became our leader. We, Church, are this new kid, fresh out of officer training, who no one really trusts and will be commanding alongside our more experienced but lower in rank, Exo Mason, who is very aware that we don't know what we're doing, something meta, because we're the player, I guess, and the game itself knows you don't know what you're doing. He'll be complaining about everything as we go along, which I would never do, and if you actually play well enough to make it really far in the game, he'll start trusting you a bit more, which is nice. What I'm going to do now is try to jump on quickly to the next mission, without ranting about the game mechanics and lore too much, as we aren't even at the start of the game yet. This is all a prelude you can skip in the campaign menu if you like. It's just a really detailed and drawn-out tutorial, and yeah, it is really good as a tutorial. It doesn't feel like one either, despite being really basic in how it teaches you. It's very eye-opening about how easy it can be to provide both hand-holding and choice and challenges at the same time. What happened in this mission was that our hero Church was ordered not to engage the machines at this location. I think we were supposed to be doing recon, but Church took it upon himself to attack the machines anyway, because they appeared to be transporting captured civilians. A very unusual thing for an anti-human AI to do. Why not just kill them? Well, we'll find out later. If you've seen Terminator, you might also already know. Church rescues these civilians, and we get a doctor from a nearby homestead to treat their wounds, and now we have to extract them in transports of our own, all the while fighting off Legion forces and learning things about using cover, smoke, buildings, ammunition, and more about who we even are. And I'll save the rants about who we are for a bit later, I think. This mission has a slightly annoying ending where you escort the civilians to the evac point. Then it says, right, go and meet with the rearguard back where you were, essentially. And when you get there, they're like, oh, the enemy's coming, better go to the evac point, so you just go back there again. There's a bit of a good old-fashioned Ludo narrative dissonance here, if you like, because what the plot wants to happen here is that you abandon the rearguard squad to die to cover your escape. And this will mean your underlings don't trust you because they don't like you for forcing that situation to happen. But it kind of wasn't really forced to happen because the amount of time it gives you to escape is more than enough for the rearguard to escape as well. And also, like a veteran player might note, the army the enemy sent against you probably wasn't enough to defeat you if you just stayed where you were in the first place. Snark, 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 it doesn't matter. What does matter is that by fleeing from this battle back to our main base, we end up bringing the Legion army to our base, and supposedly they didn't know we had this thing. Which I guess doesn't make any sense given its massive size and the amount of vehicle and indeed radio traffic that must be associated with it. Snark, snark, snark. I think we're actually really far underground, but handily the developers have lit the stage as if a large part of it is outside, so you can see what's going on. That's handy. We enter the map and it's kind of like we're reaching the end of a long cave tunnel and the Legion are following behind us. So we've ruined everything. We've led the Legion to our base, all for the sake of starting that fight to save a few disgusting civilians. And there are various arguments throughout the game stemming from whether the military should bother to save civilians, because they're really annoying. And Church is like, well, isn't it our job to save the civilians? But the other officers are like, no, our job is to kill the robots. It doesn't matter if anyone's left alive by the end of it. And tiffles ensue. We'll talk more about the lore tiffles later. First, I want to say that we're entering one of the best tutorial missions in any game ever. It's also one of the hardest and most intense tutorial missions ever. It very much sets the tone in terms of complexity of the objectives you'll be asked to pull off, the diversity of tools at your disposal, and how much freedom you have to use them as you see fit. The AI you're facing is all scripted. This is a bit confusing, isn't it? The AI controlling the AI in the lore is scripted, meaning it doesn't have any sort of clever bot-like behavior, pun intended. Like in my previous videos on Spellforce 3, where I was talking about how good the AI was, and that was what was causing the depth of challenge in the game. Here, it's simply that the AI is scripted in such detail, and that loads of stuff happens in every mission. This causes the depth. Your objectives will just change unexpectedly all the time. Things happen unannounced. There are branching paths, and different scripted outcomes will happen based on what you're doing as a player. There's always loads of stuff to do and think about, and this tutorial mission sets that tone very starkly, which I'm framing as good, but of course you could equally frame it as bad, because it's pretty merciless too. It just like piles everything on top of you. It's like, well, now you need to know how to play the game, and the game hasn't even started really. It has this feel where it just assumes you know a bit more about what's going on and how to play than a tutorial probably should. Reminds me of when I had my first driving lesson and they told me to drive somewhere after I got in the car, and I was like, I don't know how to drive. This is a driving lesson, and apparently you were supposed to learn by doing, and they didn't appreciate my snark, and I probably nearly died along the way. Well, in Terminator Dark Fate, Defiance, Retribution, Revengeance, Judgment Day, Super EX2+, Digital Deluxe Edition, it captures the anxiety of weighty expectations very nicely. And if you couldn't save scum, the game would be 1 out of 10 for doing this, even though I'm still framing it as a good thing. So yes, I have mixed feelings on this, clearly. Hopefully we're all confused enough by now, because that's the perfect state of mind for this game. Perhaps one less nebulous criticism of this mission is that as a tutorial, it is teaching you to do something that actually almost never happens in the game. To hold a line, do a phased withdrawal, and use defense turrets. From my memory, there's only one mission in the game with a significant amount of defense involved. You almost always are attacking, you clear a map, and then withdraw in the classic RTS campaign style. And I've complained here and there on this channel that RTS defense missions tend to be better made than attack missions, for reasons I'll avoid ranting about here, but I certainly will rant about later. All we need to know for now is that this mission, despite being the tutorial, is really a one-of-a-kind standout mission. What I'm going to be doing here is holding 3 approaches to our base with an ever-increasing selection of units available as our comrades mobilize squads and vehicles for the defense. While I show off some of the action, I want to talk about a central mechanic that we'll need to get very familiar with and is formally introduced in this mission despite being present in the earlier missions: ammo. Unlike the majority of strategy games, your units can and indeed easily will run out of ammunition and become decreasingly useful. I've seen people moaning about this, and I sort of sympathise. I guess it is taking something away in the classic, like, the game is so complex that adding one mechanic requires the player to stop using another mechanic kind of way that I've complained about a lot in RTSs. That being something along the lines of, if you removed the need to have ammo in this game, so if everything was just infinite, you wouldn't be doing any less stuff. You'd just do something else instead of managing ammo, because there's so much you could do. You're never doing as much as you can. Well, that is because I'm playing it like an RTS, and as I mentioned earlier, you're not quote-unquote supposed to play this game like an RTS, and that sort of muddies what I'm saying here. I'm going to have to explain this more later when we have a little bit more detail on what I'm talking about. To some extent, you need to pay attention to what your units are firing at. The game does nothing to make this easy, really. You don't get low ammo markers or callouts or something. You need to actually select your units a lot and keep what you see in the bottom left in mind. And you might notice that's basically impossible to manage. You can theoretically disable weapons on a squad to save ammo, but microing that is going to be very difficult because your army gets really big, and you'd better remember which squads you've disabled which weapons on so you can go back and reactivate them mid-battle when they're needed. Essentially, the reason running out of ammo is an interesting mechanic is both because it introduces supply truck management and some more strategic decision making. We'll talk about that later because that's really in the background here. But the other reason it's interesting is that it brings up a metaphysics of game design issue, which is the matter of persistency mixing with RNG. It's a case where the butterfly effect stemming from RNG doesn't necessarily average out. Usually, when developers are scripting a gameplay experience that has RNG in it, they can rely on the fact that if enough RNG calls are being made throughout the game, the result averages out and you can know what it's going to be. It's a bit like quantum physics game design, you know? But when you add finite ammo, it muddies things, such that the developers, even if they know what the average player's army composition is at a given stage in the game, they still can't tailor a challenge for a given stage because of the extra layer of RNG that ammo management adds. Say the player army has 20 anti-tank shots between their units. So you do the maths and you look at the accuracy of units and stuff, and you say, right, we think on average, with that amount of ammo, and crucially, with the average amount of luck, they will kill 10 vehicles. So let's put in 8 if we want it to be easy, let's put in 12 if we want it to be hard, something like that. But for two players of the exact same skill level, it is possible for one to hit 0 shots by no fault of their own, and for one to hit 20 shots by no merit of their own. Player 1 will now take massive losses in the battle that persist throughout the game. Player 2 cruises through with spare resources to buy extra units. Like the equally skilled players will now be served differing levels of difficulty from then on in the game, which will compound, and the developers have no control over that anymore. They can't even know that it's happened. This will lead to a curious situation that beyond the start of the game, an increasing fraction of the player base is having a game experience the developers can't predict. All they can hope is that the middle 75% of players are having this mythical average time and that it's going okay. They are forced though to let some people have an either really easy or really hard time, game-breakingly so potentially, and all of this stems from having a random factor that can trigger absolutely regardless of player skill, which normally wouldn't matter, but with enough persistency and enough feedback loops like in this game, it actually does, and in my opinion is worth bringing up. In pure game design metaphysics terms, having the player's result be so disconnected potentially from the player's performance or their skill is what some in the industry would call bullshit. Most games give you infinite ammo, most games don't have persistency, they don't have this problem. But going for both amplifies the feedback loop in a way that I haven't seen much of before, hence mentioning it again. Well, I think it's worth having this in mind before we press on with the game at least. Oh, positive feedback loops, how we love you. Now, my snark here might make you think I'm saying this is bad. Actually, I think it's really good. I loved the logistics part of the game for some reason. I even think the way that RNG and persistency clash here does make sense. It's a good setup because this game ostensibly wants to be realistic. And while it's not realistic, the vague artistic concept of dealing with unfair situations does come through in these hypothetical cases. What are you supposed to do if the game's telling you to kill a tank, but your anti-tank weapon missed and you can't fire it again. I don't know. Deal with it. Like, this is war, think of something. And that's the good part of this design. That's what makes the game good. Even though at first it might not be fun to think that like RNG means you don't get to make progress, you're falling behind, and the game is still going to be spawning units against you as if you made that progress because they don't know what happened to you. It's immediately like, well, should I waste my time by save scumming and trying to play the game in a way that feels like that's what the developers thought would happen, trying to second guess like what I'm supposed to be doing to keep up with the balancing curve? Well, there's a pit of insanity there that normally I would just fall into, but if you resist and persist and try to somehow win no matter what's happening, I think you'll get the experience the game was tailored for. Now, did I actually get this experience? No. Things went bad enough in my first playthrough of the Haven-based mission that I was too paranoid to continue playing, even though that's the usual mindset and even like the rules I tend to impose on myself for making video game commentaries. Because I wasn't just going to put up with that. I was like, nope, I refuse to like only play half the campaign and then have to play the entire game again to get back to here. I value my time so much, I'm going to waste some time now because I expect it will save me time later. So with that in mind, I did save scum, like right from the beginning, and we'll see various times throughout the campaign I save scummed. I really didn't apply my principles at all in this run, and I strongly suspect, as I said, that this is kind of necessary because the way missions play out is heavily scripted. You get a huge advantage the second time versus the first time just because you know what's going to happen. And maybe the game is somewhat balanced with that in mind, I don't quite know, and I'm too cowardly to even experiment with playing the game blind, and I guess I've blown my chance now, haven't I? But what I did take away, like from the bits I did manage to get through blind without save scumming, is that it is the real way to play. There were definitely loads of fun and really immersive moments. On balance, would it be better if the game was different? Probably, but the unique setup the game has, well, it's something. Yes, my comments are just coming down to, this is one of the games of all time. Now, what actually happened there? So I played the Haven-based mission again, with, well, mostly just a slightly better execution of the same plan as before, where we're falling back, I'm leaving minefields behind to delay the enemy. One little detail I found works really well, here's a tip, is that if you place your one tank on the west side of the map, it can range across the lake over there and see one of the enemy's 3 spawn points. The enemies spawn off the map and then come in to attack you. However, you can shoot enemies that are off the map. So the Abrams sits there, spawn camping everything. I guess I have no footage, you don't see it happening. But everything's dying before it can appear on the map or turn its weapons towards the Abrams and fire back, and that lessens the pressure you're under. Not that this really matters, because the game is forcing you to lose in this battle, so even if you hold the outer defenses comfortably, you still have to make a messy retreat anyway and give up everything. And everything falls apart by design. It's a battle where winning would mean game over because it's not the objective. All we need to do is escape with as many people alive as possible. And they will become our army once the game actually begins after this, so there's your motivation. My retreat was messed up because you have to leave the map in the bottom right, and I intended to send loads of the army to the bottom left, then across the bottom towards the bottom right, and it looks like you can do that on the minimap. However, giving that order caused the troops to path back to the center of the base, then over to the evac route via a long path. You actually can make the path I was looking for, but the pathfinding gods weren't on my side. It must have been just on the edge of that being the shortest path, maybe because there are stairs and ramps in the way. Well, I had to evacuate through an area already abandoned to the enemy. This was not ideal, and we got shot quite a lot. It should have been worse than it is here, because your troops can get shot quite a lot without dying, which I'll discuss more later, I think. I think this is tied to difficulty level. But we're going to ignore all this because it didn't happen in this timeline anymore. I save-scummed again, like just for the ending, and played the retreat again, now knowing where the pathfinding was going to be a bit more favourable, and left quicker. I think I saved every squad, albeit not every member of the squads. It's the squads overall that matter rather than troop count, as we'll see in a bit, so this is all fine. I had one squad go via that intended southern route, because you can activate the base's self-destruct down there. This is one of loads of optional objectives in the game that actually does branch and change things, so I'm going to have some fun as we go along trying to guess what objective caused what thing to happen in each mission. In this case, I believe blowing up the base reduces the number of enemies you face in the first main story mission, or at least that is implied by later dialogue. If you leave the base intact, perhaps you can come and get some gear later on or something. So that's that. The base is lost. It's all my fault apparently. But we did evacuate all of our personnel and the civilian population we had living here too, which I think was optional. It went about as good as it could have gone, giving us a healthy force with which to start our adventure, and I only used time travel twice to achieve this, which is quite appropriate for the Terminator franchise. Well, the adventure begins now, and it really is an adventure because we're progressing into the more RPG-ish side of things, in which our crew will go on a wild adventure across America in this quasi-AWOL state. The game doesn't really show you this, but the rest of the army was airlifted away to return to our headquarters, wherever that might be. How they were airlifted out of a cave, like undetected by the enemy at the same time, I don't know. I think there's some kind of secret lift to a secret helipad on a mountaintop that the machines can't see for some reason or something. The machine presence in this world is much less than in the old Terminator lore, as I mentioned, and we will certainly be able to go about our business in the game undetected for the most part. Like, the machines won't notice you moving massive armor formations across the land, so they're not really paying attention. It's much more casual than in the old Terminator lore. That's all good. Maybe this all fits together, and I'm snarking at nothing as usual. So our airlift was destroyed, that's the actual point, forcing us to leave the base on foot, and we lost radio contact with the rest of the army. And probably we've lost any hope of walking to the HQ because our characters don't think it's a possibility. Maybe it's really far away. Therefore, we're out of the army for all intents and purposes. We were abandoned, and the goal at first is to survive in the world and get our bearings. We see the first hint of all the logistics management you have to do in between the missions, which is both good and bad, and I think I'll talk about it later because there'll be plenty of chances, that's for sure. For now, just know I used some economic magic to give everyone all the ammo I can, and then I traversed the map to enter a nearby town. Thus begins the first actual stage, and I was in for a surprise now, as the game takes a very RPG-ish turn. The game comes with a smattering of parts like this one, in which you're less fighting a battle and more exploring a map. It usually ends in a battle, but before then you can talk to locals and pick up quests. Here we encounter some guy who asks if a random van is ours. You can say it is, and you get a free van at the end of the conversation, handy. These guys explain that there are people living in underground shelters beneath a nearby town, and a local crime lord is operating nearby, salvaging military vehicles from old battles against the machines. Those will be our links to further exploration, but first I wanted to snark that your characters don't know about these people or these places, which becomes a running theme, and I say this because this town, Abiquiu, is less than an hour's walk from Haven Base. It's implied to be the nearest place to Haven Base. It feels like we should at least be aware of what's happening in the immediate proximity of our former base, right? There's actually an independent, militia-like human army operating down here, which our characters have never even heard of, despite them controlling massive amounts of territory, up to and including the front door of our territory. It's not really a big deal, and you'll see this often. It's a case where the player is meeting people for the first time, and hence the character must also be meeting all this for the first time, because that's the writing tradition, the fish out of water approach. But in this case, our characters should have been here before and known all this stuff already. It works both ways too. This army, the so-called movement, have also never heard of you, the so-called founders. I was going to put off explaining what these factions are, but I guess I'll quote-unquote quickly explain what the Founders is now, because at first it can be slightly confusing for a simple reason. We are not the US Army. It looks like we are, and plot-wise, for us to have all this stuff and be who we are, we must actually be the US Army. Yet two factors seem to confuse things a little. First is another fiction writing principle, I suppose, which I don't like and I'm now going to rant about, which is calling all groups in a world, in a franchise, the noun. Because that's such a rare thing to happen in real life. It bothers me. It's gotten to bother me. The closest thing you'll find to that in the real world is usually the proper noun format. Yes, I am going to rant about this. The proper noun format. For example, here in the UK, we aren't called the Toothless. We're called the British, a name that without context doesn't mean anything. And that's how names work. The writing tradition that's come about is that a name has to mean something to the audience, when they first hear it. So when writing about the UK for an alien audience, the British would call themselves the Toothless in this story, in the hopes of communicating something about that group to the reader. But really, most factions have more complex names that also communicate more things to the reader. So to divert to a more relevant example, if this army we're meeting wasn't called the Movement, and was called something technical instead, like the American Freedom Front, the Republic of Humanity, the Texas State Guard, the New Orleans Patriots, that's still got content, while bringing a real-world name convention. And I would even prefer something meaningless, like they're called the Chuckatomi Grounders, and one can assume there's a reason those syllables are their name, in the same way that there's probably some reason you can call some people the Floridians. Like, that doesn't mean anything, but there's probably a story behind that. Alright, so here are my rules then. No groups allowed whose name is a noun. No groups allowed whose name even makes any sense to anyone. And broadly, no groups who are named using, like, shortened versions of a sports team's name. The Reapers, the Collectors. No, you've got to call them like the Beta Sagittarians and have a reason for that name. Like there's an origin story for the first people who had to name them and gave them that name as a placeholder or something. Even if reaping and collecting is what they do, people don't name things like that IRL. We aren't the Toothless, we aren't even going by the Redcoats anymore, and that's almost breaking my rules. So what exactly am I mad at here? Well, I guess what started me off is that our faction is called the Founders, despite very obviously being the US Army. When did we rebrand? And why did we rebrand? Is the term US Army a copyrighted name? Would an army rebrand that hard in the middle of a war? I don't know. This is a very minor point, which is why we're talking about it here on the OffyD's Game Grounds channel, but it does have an actual impact, I think, at least on me, because this is a quite immersive game mechanically. It really draws you in with what you're doing. So I think unimmersive aspects in the setting are a distraction from that. I feel more inclined than usual to harp on about things like this. They're ruining a good thing. Like, it would be better if they actually did name things a bit differently. I'm genuinely saying that is the case. So, yes, a new boring rewrite will be incoming, where the Founders are called, like, United States Joint Command, and they're working with an official government in exile, and it's all very realistic and plausible, and maybe people could give them a casual name. They'd call them the Stripes, as a fun nickname, highlighting the difference between those who cling to the old order, the stripes of the USA flag, and those like the Movement who have managed to create their own order with their own rules. And even better, these factions could know that each other exist, to salve my earlier complaint. And relax, I'm going to take the mic away from myself now and see if I manage to talk about the game for real tomorrow. Let's do it then, let's get bogged down in the action and have a comfy time with it. That's what I want to mainly do with this series. Ignore a lot of the footage I just showed you, by the way, because I essentially experimented and then saved-scummed some stuff away, and we'll talk about my findings there later. First, we reached this movement base and we listened to a conversation in which one of their leaders defects to you instantly. However, this doesn't appear to do anything. But there is this mechanic where, sometimes, based on what you do in missions, you get a certain amount of reserve troops added to the army, which are troops that aren't in any particular unit and can be used to refill slots in any unit. And maybe that guy was our first one, we'll see. What I'm doing here is setting up for an attack on a Legion position nearby, where they're guarding a little clump of buildings, which is right on top of where a load of local people are hiding underground. Our plan is to rescue them and get some supplies to get back on the road. The overall mission here is just to leave with a profit. There's no particular destination or goal in mind as of yet. My plan here was to fire ATGMs from a long distance to destroy these spider walkers on guard at that post. I might as well define these terms as I go along, mightn't I? ATGM, anti-tank guided missiles, are these one-size-fits-all solution to vehicles. They have an extremely long range, although not as long as I was hoping for because I wanted to shoot across this farm field east of the buildings. Because I do magically have line of sight on them, for reasons we'll get to. ATGMs are probably the main character of the game, like mechanically. They're so useful, so accurate, so long range, that really the game's economy in the background is going to revolve around how much ammo and how many launchers you can accumulate. It's a big advantage the humans have over the machines in general. Legion doesn't really use long-range anti-vehicle options in most missions. They can deploy ATGMs, but they just don't. So in a standoff-style engagement strategy, if you bring ATGMs, you will win. And you'll see that consistently throughout the game as we go on, since I very regularly relied on this approach. If you're wondering where I get ATGMs from in the impoverished, nearly post-apocalyptic Colorado countryside, then wait until my rant after this mission, possibly in the next part of this series actually. While the Legion lack ATGMs in most cases, they do have these spiders, which very rarely will be carrying ATGMs. They are slowish weapons platforms that come with 2 autocannon-like guns in their default loadout. They're intended to kill infantry, so I was hesitant to attack them because that's mainly what I have. I eventually reformed and attacked from the north where the line of sight was a bit better, and of course started the attack from closer so the ATGMs would be in range. We also have some movement units rushing in to help us out here. The movement army is generally worse than the Founders army or the Founders units. But there are exceptions, and in some ways, the roster of the movement faction is better equipped to face the Legion. I'll talk more about them later. For now, missiles and snipers clear the area. The movement set up their infantry in front of the last spider in the corner and gradually get themselves killed. But the good news is that a spider can be taken out in one hit from the lightest infantry AT weapons, and a lot of movement troops have RPGs which will do that. Once the job is done, the civilians are rescued and they say we can have some supplies from their underground stash. Basically, that's the mission accomplished as far as we're concerned. However, there is more stuff on the table here, and this is a running theme in virtually all missions. You don't have to do most of the stuff available to you, but you probably should because that's the game. Allow me to introduce Kondo, a guy living in a trailer nearby who has rigged this whole area with cameras, which is why we have such great line of sight, especially over a Legion army you can see on the minimap that's doing nothing over on the west side of the river. We know that Legion are trying to capture civilians, and Kondo's wife was already captured, so he's been working on a plan to rescue captured prisoners, and he wants to try it out right now. The first step of the plan is to let everyone get captured, because essentially Kondo is this Hollywood-style hacker, meaning he can do absolutely anything the script requires as long as a computer is involved. And in this case, it means that if he gets close to Legion units, he can take control of them. So he'll let himself get captured and then do his thing somehow. That's his plan, but there are also the movement forces to consider and their interests. You are given a pretty big choice here about just leaving with your prize or taking the movement forces under your command, but you have to fight for them in exchange. Their desires being to protect the general settlement and their forward base here from the Legion attack that's about to come in. In the footage I used as B-roll before, you might have noticed there's another way to play this mission that causes the movement to retreat without fighting and without you being given this option, and the Legion will attack earlier than usual, that being if you start a firefight with Balzano, the crime lord in the north of the map. Starting a fight with him is absolutely the wrong option, by the way, as anything you can gain by stealing his stuff and defeating his gang is actually given to you for free if you help the movement, because when you stand and fight, the looter gangs abandon the map and just leave behind all of their valuable stuff, including a fuel tanker and a Bradley IFV, which you can later claim. There's loads more stuff out there in the fields too, although the entire top right of the map is a massive minefield. The looters had this genius idea that if they cover the scrap fields with mines, no one else will be able to take the prizes in there. However, this fails on 2 counts. First, you can realistically just drive through the minefield, because the anti-personnel mines there do very little damage to vehicles. And that tiny chip damage it does can be repaired pretty much instantly with this repair command you have, and I'm going to talk more about repair commands in the future because that's a whole thing. Also, you don't really have to venture into the minefield for this objective. It's telling you to hide out there, while Legion just overruns the area and captures everybody, including the Legion base, but maybe we'll get to that. By the way, the second count of looter failure I was about to talk about, I'm actually going to talk about in a few minutes, because we'll see it. Don't worry about that. I know what I'm talking about, I promise you. So, we sit out there for a while. It's decided that once Kondo is captured, we now need to cause a distraction so he can do his thing. And it gives you one of the very rare time limits in the game, where you have a few minutes to kill a certain number of Legion units to have officially caused a distraction. I said this is the only hard time limit, but there are soft time limits, in, well, every mission I guess, because of the ammo persistency and fuel persistency and stuff. There are explicit mechanics that kind of add time limits to a lot of missions in some ways. We'll rant about that later, no doubt. Lots of rants being queued up for later in this series, so look forward to that. This time limit is easy to deal with because all you have to do is kill a few Legion units as a distraction, and the Legion army is so spread out over the map. You can focus and overpower a couple of random robot dogs or robot birds easily. I'm actually going to rant about the robot dogs later in this series too. I had lots of thoughts on this game, suffice to say. Now, Kondo sets off an EMP in the Legion prisoner convoy, just somehow, and then starts hacking their units to join our side. Somehow. The time limit goes away, and now we're just going to clear out the enemy, with a few Legion units on our side acting as AI-controlled allies that will shoot them from the west. I'm mainly trying to get myself to the movement base again, because it does tell you you'll get more supplies in the end if you enter the buildings there, so you need to go in and garrison them a bit, and then some invisible supply counter will go up. It's kind of confusing because the game talks about supplies a lot, which are this abstract thing you collect in missions. There's no indicator you're doing it. Other than that, some characters will say, hey, we found some supplies, or here are some supplies, or something like that. And then after the mission reward effectively is based on how many times you saw a dialogue implying you got supplies. It's a bit confusing, we'll see it in a bit. You also get control of Kondo now, who's freed the rest of the civilians and can be used to escort them to a hiding place in the bottom right of the map, via this long back road that avoids the battle, which you might be able to see on the minimap. It seems to be very obviously set up specifically for doing this objective. As this battle plays out, let's point out a few things. First, I split my force so that a couple of the movement vehicles would go south and guard the route that the civilians and Kondo were taking. This, as it turns out, isn't required, and it's one of the many moments in the game, if not all of the moments, when playing a mission not blind would give you a distinct advantage, because my movement units are really struggling to clear Legion Terminators from the base, and my Founders units are getting kind of stuck in the north. I needed those reinforcements, but if I had known I don't need to send troops to do this side objective, everything else would have been easier, and well, you can imagine how that's going to work throughout the entire game. The struggle I was having with the Founders, by the way, is that I was trying to pathfind from this road south into the Legion base, but the bluffs there aren't passable. They are actually passable far to the right and far to the left. Some of my army went over far to the right, the other one passed to the left-hand side, walked down the road without me paying too much attention, then got pinned down because a bunch of enemies were coming down the road in the other direction. And we end up in trouble. There's no cover here, we're stuck in the open, but you can go prone to get cover bonuses even in the open. You have to press V or something while the units are selected. And I do remember the game tells you somewhere this is very ineffective to do on roads, so we're playing it wrong here. It's more like going prone is supposed to make you concealed, so if you lie in grass, you're hard to see. But the way the game handles that mechanically is it gives you a cover bonus as if you're behind something. Although it may actually work more like an armor save, where sometimes getting hit doesn't count instead. There is stuff to rant about when it comes to how cover works in this game, but we're going to save that for later as well. The point is I wasn't making that much progress, and slowing things down even further is that I had begun to take advantage of the so-called intended way to play this game, as a turn-based game rather than a real-time one. This is a big deal for this game. You can pause the game and give orders at any time, and because in virtually every mission, you will be fighting on multiple fronts, doing many objectives at the same time, just like here. And because the precise details of what you're doing matters immensely due to feedback looping and so many units being killable in one hit, I found that increasingly the most effective and most comfortable way to play the game is to pause it every few seconds, and I mean every few seconds. This slows the pace of battles to an absolute crawl, and all semblance of RTS combat flies merrily off out the window. Intentionally, I believe, but it does dilute the immersive, action-packed battles of the game because you generally are seeing fragments play out one after the other. Like you might give some orders while things are paused, and then you would watch, say, a small rocket fly from an infantry squad to wherever, which takes a few seconds, and then now it's time to pause again and think, right, that missed. The spider advancing on me is closer because of it, should I change the order on that squad? Then you multiply that by 10 because you have 10 squads all doing different things, and then later in the game you'll be multiplying it by 50 because there's so much stuff going on. There are a lot of orders you can give, And the game not only allows you to micro with AI-like precision, which is an ironic ludonarrative dissonance, isn't it? But because the game's quite difficult, and it's feedback looped up to the nines, you get the impression that you're meant to take up the opportunity it's giving you to pause all the time. This will come to define how the game plays, which is why I effectively call it turn-based. This mission is the worst example of that, by the way, because it's the beginning of the game, but as usual I'm just going to rant about this anyway, we'll see more later. But I claim, and might later evidence, that a 10-minute fight can take 30 minutes, because there's just so much to do. There are so many details to go through, so many things to do while time is stopped, and every few seconds there will be grounds to stop time again and assess how the last quote-unquote turn went. I felt obliged to mention this now, even though it's not that bad in this mission, because it's something that needs to be revealed early. It's something you need to know about this game. I think the pausing in this mission only added about 10 minutes to the playtime of the roughly 1 hour of real time. Experiments and save scumming added 20 minutes from the early antics too, and broadly I won't be doing things like that as we go on. I think I got save scumming down to a bare minimum as well, we'll see. I didn't really want to spend loads of time on each mission, that's my point. But I did, because I wanted to succeed, and the tools for success were slow to use, and I felt like I needed to use them to get what I wanted. And that's going to be a game-defining setup. I'm still not sure if I'm framing this as good or bad. Only, you have to know that that's how the game is. There is this spectrum, essentially, of, playing it on your second playthrough with quick saves allowed and pausing allowed, to playing it on your first playthrough with Iron Man rules and real-time commands only. Two very different experiences that are both available in the game, but I'm hung up on which one might be better. Usually, in a situation like this, in my rants, I would be like, oh, just do X. Just cut X out. I would have some strong opinion on which approach they quote-unquote should have taken. However, I genuinely don't know what the best approach would be for this game, other than saying the fact that the game of course does let you choose which approach to take. It's all in here. That, in theory, is probably the real meta best option. Maybe that's why I don't have anything to say. I'm complaining, but I think how it is the perfect way of doing it. What they've done is what I would have suggested they had done had they actually taken either of those approaches separately. So maybe no changes are required. It's just a case where some people will still say the game should force you into the harder route in order to force a certain experience upon you, and I can kind of sense that being the case, because not being allowed to pause or make saves would really be in line with the spirit of the game, I thought, and it would create a more unique experience. Going for this more hardcore experience, while it would be more unique and special, and I think get rid of some of the downsides of the game, it would also be really unpopular probably. It would take some real cultural capital to force people to play this game, Iron Man, in real time. It's sort of like Dark Souls basically. I'm talking about a game, let's just say it's like Dark Souls. Here the link is that it's not necessarily ultimately fun, but going through it is fun. It's a sort of, the fun you have is that you are always at risk of not having fun, and so you can feel especially good that the fun you did manage to get was unique, it was special, it was exclusive, because of that risk that you wouldn't have it and the knowledge that some players don't get it. That fashion. After all of the ranting, the end result is probably just leave it as it is, and then collapse onto the floor in a stupor. While I was ranting there, we broadly achieved our goals, we defeated the enemy and such. So let's take a look at the all-important ending of the mission, because how missions play at their very end is a unique part of this game, and will likely invoke some more love it or hate it attitudes. As you've probably noticed, we were able to easily win the battle by the end, as a huge army of movement troops showed up, bringing artillery as well. We stomp the remains of the Legion troops, and the movement officer kid says she'll let the wider movement know about the founders and that we're the good guys. How they don't know about us already, I don't know, but my therapist says I probably don't need to worry about it. Another little note, by the way, is that you probably also noticed we don't have all the units we saved from the previous mission available here. They only show up after the battle is over. However, throughout the battle, if you had a unit at the top left, you could use it to call in the rest of the army. Another little detail where that's a second playthrough idea. Leave a guy behind to trigger that instantly, to get more troops ASAP, that sort of thing. For me, I didn't get any use out of my troops, but we'll get some use now, as it's time for commentary on the after battle. When a battle ends, you're usually invited to leave the map on your own time. First though, you'll want to maraud around the map looking for anything you can steal. Almost always there will be random abandoned vehicles here and there for you to collect, and also whenever you fight alongside the movement forces, they tend to be very messy about leaving vehicles behind after a battle, which means you can send a crew to take abandoned vehicles for yourself from their forces, and that's all considered fair enough. We've got two main salvaging projects for the mission. First, there is an Abrams tank randomly parked on the main road, because USA, well, no, that's copyrighted, Founders Territory, or something. Well, it's now Movement Territory actually in the lore. Yes, the Legion had this idea that if they place an Abrams on the battlefield, I think it's that we would rush forwards and claim it and they would ambush us or something. Unfortunately, I didn't get anywhere near it until the Legion units were all dead, and now we just get a free tank, so that worked out pretty well. It's not quite that easy because it's got no fuel, raising questions about how it got there, as the Legion don't have any vehicles that can tow tanks, but let's not get too mad about that now, shall we? Or shall we? No, resist the voices, Devin. I need to work out how to do in-mission refueling, and I've already stolen a fuel tank out from the movement. It's over on the other side of the map, but we'll get to that. In the meantime, Salvage Project 2 begins. Some of the looter gang reappear on the map and come to contest the minefield. We didn't see much of what happened to them when they did this at first, however I will report to you that I heard many explosions from the fog of war, and we didn't fight many looters, and I also noticed the fleet of vehicles they brought with them was laying around the place abandoned later. So I highly suspect that this is the other problem with laying a minefield right on top of the place you want to access. No idea how many enemies the mines killed, but they seemed to help. Meanwhile, I can just be careful to advance with vehicles only to clear paths, and we'll be fine. When we find things to salvage out here, we'd be pretty lucky if they happened to have the keys in the ignition, ammo in the guns, and fuel in the tank. And yes, we're that lucky every time. However, there is actually a reason why these old vehicles haven't been salvaged already, and that is because they are heavily damaged. In the game, vehicles can be immobilized by damage. Damage is spread between mobility, the chassis, and weaponry, with the ability to compromise any and all of these features. So what we're salvaging here is like an APC with no tracks or no engine. But that's where repairing comes in. Repairing is the most powerful force in the universe in this game, because your drivers can fix just about anything in only a few seconds. With a box of scraps in a cave, while repairing a vehicle, you have this spare parts meter that's dropping in the vehicle's UI. Most vehicles are carrying enough spare parts that if some aspect gets disabled, you can replace that aspect with a new one, and you can do that like 10 times as well. It's abstracted away into this spare parts meter, which can represent anything. So if your vehicle bursts 15 tyres in a row by driving over anti-personnel minefields, for example, then the spare parts meter is retconned to presume you had 15 spare wheels tucked away. Tank barrel melted by plasma, you've got another one, you've got another 10. If your engine gets blown into fragments by a rocket, well, just put the other engine in, it should only take 5 seconds. Is the chassis on fire? Luckily, within the chassis of every vehicle is a complete copy of that chassis. Essentially, it's very generous about letting you repair away fatal vehicle damage with your mysterious stashes of spare parts and everybody's immense mechanical skill at employing them. You can run out of spare parts and you can get them back via another mysterious stash of abstract and retconnable parts we've yet to meet properly. We'll talk about that in part 2. The point is, we grab some military vehicles that, for us, will drive, and they wouldn't drive for anyone else. We have the magical repairmen who get them driving within minutes. We have to kill like 2 or 3 looters, the scraps alive by the time we got through the minefield. And then we repair and steal all the vehicles the looters brought in as well. Combined with stealing what the gang left behind in their base, including a Bradley, and further combined with the fact the movement army not only lets us take their vehicles, but they don't give a damn that their vanguard defected to us and is now just walking off with us under our command now. All of this means we've jumped from being like a few guys in a van at the start of this mission to a sizable company with logistics and combat vehicles ready to face the world. These post-battle segments are the best way to acquire equipment, and in some ways, it's really satisfying to scour the map claiming everything you can claim, because you just know how valuable it's going to be for the long war ahead of us. This is an advantage of the positive feedback loop gameplay. On the other hand, In most cases, there is no impediment to stealing all the vehicles on the map. I think this is one of the only missions where you have to fight something in the post-battle sequence, and it was basically nothing. And it reminds me of the feeling I had when I was playing the classic RTS, Homeworld. In that game, you were also given the option to delay leaving a mission in order to collect more resources. And I complained, saying, if you're giving me the option to do this, why not just say that I did it and give me the things? Because sailing around the map looking for the resources, and then doing the clicking to pick them up, is extremely low difficulty, low fun, low intensity gameplay that takes a moderately long amount of time, while also being so advantageous to do that you can't really skip it. It's perfect for cutting right out, and here a similar problem arises, I think. You can't see abandoned vehicles that aren't in your line of sight, even if you've seen them before. So the perfect salvaging pass involves sending your units everywhere to get full line of sight, and then mousing over all vehicles to see which ones have a white square appear that indicates it can be crewed. And you know, this is a very long game, and one way to solve that could be to just say that any vehicle that's been anywhere near you during the mission is marked as being known in some way, and we just abstractly say that all the spare crews took all the known spare vehicles when the mission ended, presuming there's no threat on the map, which is almost always the case, and it just adds them to your stockpile, because that's what the player's going to do anyway, only it takes them 10 minutes of not very good gameplay to do it, and they kind of have to do it as well because the game is probably balanced around the idea that you did it. It's not really gameplay, because the only way to fail is to get so bored that you stop doing it. That would be a failure and make the game harder for you. Well, I didn't even get all the vehicles in this first mission because there is an achievement for getting a Striker APC, which I missed. I think it's because I didn't unlock all of the side quests. There was a shifty guy trying to buy a van off you that I ignored. You could arm some local villagers against the machines by going to a part of the village, a part of the map I kind of ignored in that playthrough just there. There are achievements indicating there are all kinds of other branching paths I didn't go on, and this speaks to the depth of the game. There's a lot going on in these missions, much more than in your average RTS, that's for sure, and the positive feedback looping means there's more weight to what's going on as well. It actually matters. The upcoming part of the game will be slightly harder because I'm missing a good vehicle and more squads that I could have got. Did the developers intend for me to have those? Is it balanced on the assumption that I have them? I don't know. Again, the developers are sort of facing an impossible to judge game design challenge already, because going into the second mission, the player can have somewhere between nothing and everything. So like, what do you put on the plate for them to face as their second challenge? Very hard to judge, and I think they'll probably be saying, well, if the player can't do the second mission, they start the game again and do the first mission better. I think that's what you're supposed to do. Basically, save scum, play it again. It's actually a roguelike, guys. I think the combined stress of playing the game and trying to imagine how I would make the game better were I developing it, they're both getting to me, because I think both aspects of this are really hard. It's a hard game to play, it's also a hard game to make. Well, we've all gone positive feedback loopy here at the OffyD Game Grounds channel, and I say we because I'm including you in this as well. If you've watched this far, you must have the same brain disease as me. We're all here having a great time, having finally made it to the campaign map once again, and this is where the main campaign map gameplay and the logistics management of the game begins for real. However, it's also going to be where this video ends. There's so much more to say, but I thought I'd kick off with a look at the logistics side of things and the full management system in part 2, before we go on and move through the game after that. All I'll say for now is that we got a tip from Kondo that we should check out Albuquerque, as that's where the Legion's kidnapping operations are based, so that's the in-game objective. At the same time, the movement wouldn't mind attacking the city and taking it back, so they'll come as well, and we're all friends together, it seems. We are introduced very briefly to a faction called the Integrators here, a sort of third side in the war that we'll meet properly later in this commentary, and I'm only bringing them up now so I can tell you their name is the Integrators, and since that's like the third or fourth the noun name I've encountered, the game has dropped from a 10 out of 10 to a 6 or 7 out of 10 already. And I'll give a brief parting thought here in case this is all you see of this vast commentary project, and that is that I think the game is packed with cool stuff and cool ideas. However, I don't think I actually liked playing it. The same stuff that makes it frustrating and tense is what makes it satisfying and rewarding. But that's probably not guaranteed for everyone, and on balance, I kept thinking I wanted to stop playing it throughout, and like, that's all I can really say. It's a very long game, and ultimately I'm going to argue it's also not long enough if you get to the end of this commentary. It's very intense and high stress as games go, unless you don't care about save scumming, of course, and your overall inability to affect the war you're being shown does take away a lot from the strategic decision making you're being asked to make. You're playing through a movie for all intents and purposes, and that's something that will only become clear once we've seen quite a lot more of the campaign map gameplay and the general progression of the game, and will inform the big "I wish the game was actually like this" topic I'll be getting to later in this series. So join me soon for part 2, where the intensity ramps up, the concept of real time is truly abandoned, and the game starts to say, well, every time you complain about something, I'm adding a new front to this battle, I'm spawning a new enemy, like a new source of explosions will show up. We'll be getting a bit more serious as the game starts to pour everything it wants you to do all at once on top of you, and you just have to deal with it. It's going to be some action-packed strategy gameplay that's probably more fun to watch than to play, and of course it's even more fun to also hear some guy flippantly half remembering his strategies and complaining about the use of nouns the entire time. The OffyD Terminator Dark Fate Defiance complete commentary lies ahead of us, and if no one goes back in time to stop me, the descent into madness is inevitable. Come with me if you want to live.